I'm excited. So let's jump in and talk a little bit about smart design elements. So before we go even more into the topic, I wanted to mention that I did make a landing page of additional resources. I'll mention a few things tonight, and it was just easier for me to just make a page of all the links to different places. And if anything else comes up tonight that I think is important, we'll just add it to this page. And I think, oh, there, Alicia's got it. She just added the link in the chat, but it's just my website, Paper Garden Workshop. And then if you do a /smart, then there'll be a landing page for you. The slides will be on there. There's a little handout with the little checklist. We'll cover 8 design elements tonight that you can consider as you're designing your garden. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff too. So we'll come back to that later with this link again, but I wanted to make sure you had that. So some of you might be wondering, what do we mean by smart? And Alicia and I may have different ways of approaching it. We all might have different ways of whatever this might be, this idea of smart design elements. You know, if for some of you, it might be, you know, you just want to save money. Maybe you want to save time in your garden. Maybe you want to create something on your own versus depending on somebody else to design your garden space or your outdoor space. And whatever you're trying to do, you just want to create a cozy garden space outside, but you want to do it in a way that you're not constantly spinning wheels and doing things over and over again. You want to just try to approach it the first time the right way. And I want to say the right way in quotes because we all, I mean, that's what gardening is, right? We just try things, we mess up, we try them again. So even I do that, but it's just about, I want to give you some cool things tonight to consider. So as you approach garden design, hopefully I can prevent you from some things that you have to do again and again. But how I'm going to approach this tonight is we're going to talk about larger concepts of design, and then we're going to get to some finer details. And it's really about how can I help you design your garden with smart choices in mind as you go through the entire design process. So we're going to try to take a stab at this tonight and see where we go with it. And I'm pretty excited about that. So this is something I want you to think about also. I will come back to this at the end, but think about how you've made smart, in quotes, design elements or choices in your garden. So I'll ask you that question at the end, but as we go through this today, are there things that you've done, maybe things that I've talked about today or things that I didn't cover? And what else can we discuss in terms of smart design elements? So I have 8 elements that we're going to go through. And the first one is the overarching principle that I want you to all understand. So as we design our gardens, I'm hoping this first one, garden rooms, the concepts of garden rooms will help you make a lot of smart choices later. So again, we're going to do overarching first, and then we're going to get really detailed. So garden rooms, this is really the kind of the basic unit of landscape design. When we are creating our gardens, a landscape, we are creating an outdoor space, right? We're not just putting plants in the ground. We're actually thinking about what space are we creating? How can we use it? Now, once you understand this concept, when you make choices in the future on plants, on materials, furniture, whatever you're doing outside, I'm hoping when you understand this basic concept, you're going to save a lot of heartache in terms of like, where should I put plants? And what kind of material should I buy? And how should I use this space? Because you're thinking through it ahead of time. Okay. So let's go through a little bit about the idea of garden rooms. And some of you may have heard me talk about this before. I always try, when I talk about garden design, I always like to make sure we're all on the same plane, on the same wavelength, and make sure we all understand 2 basic concepts. We're going to talk about both of these tonight with the smart design elements. That's why I want to make sure we understand these 2 concepts. So there's the idea of spatial design and planting design. And spatial design is when we are creating the overall plan and we're creating these garden rooms, these garden spaces, and we're creating the shapes of our lawns or our patios or our decks, the areas that we're physically in, like just like you're in your house and you're in your living room or your kitchen, that's your room. We need to design these spaces outside too, so we can enjoy them. And then we're also determining in that process of creating the room, we're also determining where planting beds go and what sizes they are. So oftentimes when we design, we are getting the plants first and then putting them in the ground, and then whatever's left over is the room. And one of the things I always encourage everybody that is designing their outdoor space is to design the room first. You know, it's like running to the lumber store and buying the wood for to build your house without actually deciding, oh, you know what, I want this size of a living room and I want this size of a kitchen, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how many bedrooms I need. We're deciding those things first before we go to the store and buy the lumber, right? So that's the part of spatial design that's really important. That's the idea of garden rooms. Whereas planting design, which we'll also talk about tonight, is organizing the plants in the beds that you just created in spatial design. And you're considering form, texture, and color. You're using those to reinforce overall spaces. We're going to talk about an ecological approach tonight with plants also. So there's a whole bunch of things we can talk about in terms of garden rooms. So here is a landscape plan looking from the sky down. And if this was your backyard, you would have these garden rooms first. So I'll just highlight these really quick. So this one on the left is a laundry yard. We have a reading nook up on the top right, and we have a picnic lawn. In your yard, it might be something totally different, but these are 3 rooms that I decided needed to be in this garden, or maybe this client did. And they decided, I want these 3 functions, and now we have to design rooms around that. And then the plants the planting design is what we use to reinforce those spaces. Planting design is awesome in itself because you can do a lot of cool things. You can attract wildlife. You can grow vegetables. You can do all kinds of cool things in those planting beds. But what I really want you to take away from tonight is that we are designing the space that we are going to use as a human, and then we can share that space with wildlife and other, plants, other life forms within those beds. And the beds are there to reinforce the spaces. So yes, maybe that concept in particular, you don't know if you're spending or saving money right now, but when you understand this concept, I'm hoping it makes your choices later helpful. Like, how cool would it be if you designed your room for your dining area and you decided where the plants should go before you go to the store and actually start buying the plants? Like, now you know where to put them when you come back, and you know how much space you have for them. So that is very impactful when you understand those concepts to save money and time later on. So again, remember, we're designing the space first rather than placing the plants first. So we design the area that you're going to sit in, play in, dine in, read in. You're going to design that space first, and then we're going to put the plants around it. Okay. Do we have that concept down now? Hopefully. So garden rooms are composed of 3 things. We're not going to get into detail about this tonight because that's a whole nother presentation, but they're basically composed of what's on the floor for that garden room. Is it lawn? Is it paving? Is it mulch? What is that you're stepping on? We're going to have walls. Walls can be plants. They can be fences. They can be actual walls. Then we have ceilings. That could be tree canopies. It could be arbors. It could be string lights. So those are the general planes. And so those are just things to consider. And you can read on my resource page all about garden rooms and floors, walls, and ceilings, and you can learn all about that. But I just wanted to introduce that idea tonight because everything else that we're going to talk about tonight all hinges on those concepts of garden rooms, spatial design, and planting design. So I want to make sure. So let's keep going. I'm going to show you an example of something. So once we understand the idea of a garden room, this is something really cool. I'm hoping, and I don't know how many of you, maybe you can tell me, how many of you already understand this idea of garden rooms and you've already designed your yard, your garden in a series of rooms? Because I'm going to show you how we designed our our garden rooms during the pandemic. It's just a fun process when you get to do it on your own. Now, I want to make sure that you know it's awesome if you can hire a landscape designer. I think I always want to promote the profession. It's really great, but I know a lot of us want to do it on our own. And when we bought our house during the pandemic, we decided to design our own space, of course. And then we decided eventually to actually install it ourselves. And mostly it's because we just couldn't find a landscape designer or a contractor at the time to install it. And I'm sure a lot of you also got into this because everybody was busy, right? We all wanted to do something with our garden and do some really cool things. and we couldn't get people to help us to actually install it. We had to do it ourselves. So to help with smart design elements, I want to show you how we did our design and how we installed it on our own. So I'm hoping I can empower you a little bit if you have the time and you have the manpower, the people power to actually put it in yourself. I want to show you our process a little bit so you can see how we did it. So number one, we bought our house in Des Moines right when the pandemic started in the US. So on March, whatever it was, what was this week? Actually, it was this week, what, 4 years ago? 4 years ago now. And everything shut down. We moved into this house about the 1st of April. So we already bought it. We knew we were moving and we didn't know if we could even get a moving ban, but here we are. We got our house, we got into the house, and we have a really great urban property. I mean, it's very tiny. So this is our property. The G is the garage and the H is the house. And this is just a trick for all of you. I didn't even draw the plan to scale. I just went on Google Maps, Google Earth. You can even go on your assessor's page, your county assessor's page, and sometimes you can get the dimensions for your property on there. Since most of us are from Iowa, we know, oh, Friday the 13th, Carol just mentioned that. That is I never thought about that before. When the pandemic started here. But if you can just print out a basic map on Google Earth or Google Maps and then put tracing paper over it like this, I just went through a whole bunch of rough sketches of generally what I was thinking. Now, this is what I want to show you. So as a designer, I'm trained to think this way, but we're trained to design the rooms first, the garden rooms. So oftentimes, when we're not thinking that way, oftentimes we want to go right to the plants and start figuring out where do the plants go. So the thing I want to shift for you tonight and help you on this journey is to start thinking of the rooms first. This is to help you save time. This is to help empower you so you can lay these things out yourself. So this drawing right here is not to scale. It's actually very tiny. This plan is probably only like less than 6 inches by 6 inches. I just quickly drew it on tracing paper over the Google Earth map. And I started drawing ideas. So Tommy's my husband, we started laying out the things we wanted to do in our yard. So I asked him, like, what are you thinking? He's like, well, I really want an outdoor dining area where we can eat and have our friends over, a really big one, like for 12 people. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You wanted a fire pit area. We wanted an area where we can just have a lot of containers. So some wider areas where we can put large containers and grow things. And then we also had to work around 2 large oak trees. So these 2 circles, this one and this one, are actually the trunks. I just guessed on this little not to scale map of where those were. So now I had the idea or the fun part of laying out the rooms. So again, I'm stressing to all of you, you do not have to lay out the plants first. I want you to consider laying out the rooms first, okay? This is gonna save you a lot of heartache and overwhelm if you just lay out the rooms first. Now, some of you, obviously, most of you have gardens already, and you can do the same process with what you've got. You can start deciding how you wanna alter things or maybe clean things up or whatever it might be. So these are the lines we ended up with. We had an area in the back for our fire pit. This was our dining area. And then this is just a little area for containers and things like that. So again, not to scale, but it gives us an idea. And this weird angle is happening because of the 2 oak trees. I had to work around the 2 oak trees. I had a curvilinear option and I had this option, and I decided to go with the more geometric option. I just felt comfortable with that. And you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to show you this other trick. So that was for step 1. So hopefully that helps you just right there. The second thing we did is we took that not to scale plan, because I don't want anybody to get overwhelmed with that. You are just designing your rooms first. You're not thinking about plants, thinking about the uses for those rooms. And now we're going to go out in the yard with stakes. So I have wooden stakes and string. I don't know if you can see that on this photograph. And we started laying everything out with the stakes and the string. So I'm looking at my not to scale drawing, and now we're actually laying it out to make it work in real life. And we probably took a couple of hours and we did this together, and it was fun. And we just adjusted it as we needed to lay it out, right? So I'm still not doing a landscape plan. I'm not picking any plants out, and I'm laying out the string and the stakes. And you can do this too. And it's super fun to do this, which I absolutely love. So this is the cool part. We lay it all out. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to use those string lines to draw what it could look like. Then I can start creating like a perspective drawing of sorts, but I don't have to think perspective because the lines are already on the ground. I'm taking this photo from the second story, by the way. I'm just going to draw lines on the string lines. It's there for me. I don't even have to think. So use this technique if it helps you. Just put the stakes on the ground with a string, take a photo, and you can either just do it with tracing paper or you can use an iPad and take a photo and draw on an iPad. Whatever you want to do, just make it easy for yourself. Okay. So this was one of my first drawings by just looking out the window and using that. And then I just roughed in. This is very rough. I probably did this in 10 minutes, just some rough ideas. So Tommy could visualize like what I had in my head. And I just kind of laid out quickly, like this is what the table could look like, this really long table for 12 people. I knew that I wanted some definition, like I wanted to enclose like the walls, right? The walls of the garden room. I wanted to enclose the walls with some shrubs, maybe a perfect hedge on one side, maybe some more informal plants on the other. And again, I'm not picking out specific plants, right? I'm just getting an idea of where the rooms are going to be, how they're going to be used, and how I'm going to use plants to define them. Okay. So I'm hoping this helps in terms of like planning ahead and thinking ahead before you actually start buying the plants. The image on the right now is what it looked like that first fall. We worked all summer. We actually dug, I say we, it was mostly Tommy that dug a lot of the holes or the ground for the patios and the walks. We got limestone, we got a lot of gravel, and we put it all in one step at a time. But you know, we were home during the pandemic. I know we don't all have the time now like we used to back then, but it was really wonderful. And you can even plan it out on the left and then hire somebody else to help you if you want to, or do it over time and just do it very slowly and over time. You don't have to do it all in one day. Marge asked, how did you get the drawing over the picture? So tracing paper, you could put tracing paper if you want, and then just draw on the tracing paper. That's one way. The other way you can do it is take a photo with an iPad, if you have an iPad, and then you can use a program like Procreate. I use Adobe Fresco, but that costs more. Procreate's really inexpensive. And Morpholio Trace, there's probably a lot of other drawing programs that you can use also. But if you don't have an iPad, just use tracing paper. Take a photo from your one of your windows in your house or wherever you want it, whatever view you want, and then just take a photo and put tracing paper over it. That's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So you can see what happened. They look very similar, not perfect, but they look very similar from that to that fall. And it's still not done, just so you know. And then here we are. So you can see the string lines here. There's Sunny hanging out with me. She's always in every picture I've noticed. And we're just laying it on. There's Tommy with the wheelbarrow, bringing all the gravel in. Here it is again, that first summer, we're digging up the holes. And here's Tommy with the saxophone outside. And we're just laying it all. You can see it's not perfect. We haven't even backfilled yet. You can see our limestone. And we ordered the limestone from a local supplier. They just delivered it. I just estimated how much we needed. And then here's me with the pile of gravel in the alley. And it took a few weeks to do it, but it takes time. And we're still working on it. It is not done. Just so you know, the hardscapes are done. The rooms are done, but I'm still working out the plant materials, which we'll talk about today as one of the elements. So we'll go through that. And then just a sky view of what it ended up looking like. We were pretty impressed that our lines were straight. So strings and stakes work really well, which is cool. And then here it is again. So the view to the garage and then the same view today. So you can kind of see what that looks like. It looks so beautiful when it's green. Right now it looks so empty because of the winter, but it's coming all up, right? Which is pretty exciting. And there it is again. So I'm hoping that first idea of garden rooms will help you figure that out. You don't have to do a full-fledged landscape plan. Sketches are perfectly fine. And don't get caught up in the plants right away. You're designing the spaces first. Even if it's just on tracing paper and it's a rough sketch and it's not even to scale, because you can lay it out in real life to see what the scale is. John said, how long did it take you for each section? For each section, I would say Tommy probably dug that probably 1 or 2 days for each area. That's a great question. Like, as we were doing each of these, like this big area right now here, like it probably took him like a day or two to do that. But remember, we were home during the pandemic. We had a little bit more time, but yeah, I would say 1 to 2 days. The whole thing, like what you see Tommy here playing the saxophone, Just what we did here probably took a month and a half to 2 months to do just that part of it, if that helps. That's a great question. Great question. So yeah, so that's our DIY on laying out the spaces and then actually installing them. So this is the next trick that I want to teach you for a smart design element, using lines of force. Does everybody know what this is? Tell me yes if you know what this is, or no if you don't. I'm just curious because this is going to be the most powerful tool you're going to learn today, besides the idea of garden rooms. And I'm really curious to see how many of you know what lines of force is. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. Susan, I love it. Yes, from you. Perfect. Awesome. So there's a lot of no's. I am so excited about this. So how do we define, this is so much fun. So some of you said yes, but I would say a majority of you have said no. Probably 80% to 90% of you have said no. Lines of force is the most magical tool you will ever learn. And the nice thing about lines of force, this is great for a site that's empty, and it's great for a site that's filled already with stuff, okay? So lines of force will help you lay out your garden rooms. It's a magical tool, and I'm excited to share it with you right now. So how do we create rooms from scratch? We can go through the design process, which we're not going to do tonight. We can use lines of force, which is what I'm going to tell you in a second. We can do lots of concept sketches like what I did. And a little bit of what I did was lines of force too, but mostly it was concept sketches. So here's just a portion of the design process. When we're figuring out our sites, oftentimes we want to think about like, what do we want in our yard? Like maybe we want a lawn, we want a patio, that kind of thing, okay? And then and those are just bubbles, rough ideas. What lines of force is it helps us define the actual shapes of the room. So if I want a lawn and a patio here, well, what does that look like? So after lines of force, I can actually start defining it in this third one. So basically lines of force is using a grid that extends from your house onto your property on a piece of paper, and then you use that grid to lay everything out on your plan. So we want to keep it as simple as possible. And one thing I want to point out is that when you're doing this grid, you are not designing. So this middle one right here, all you're doing is extending a line from every edge of the house, the edge of the window, the middle of the window, the edge of the door, the middle of the door, the edge of the door, anything that changes on the surface of your house all the way around it, you're going to just draw lines from it. So of course you're going to need a base map or Google Maps or something to do this. And this is when you would need some kind of a scale of some sort, kind of. I mean, it's not going to be horrible. Even if you don't have it perfectly to scale, you can still do what I did in the first set, not have it to perfectly to scale, and this can still help you lay things out. But it's just a grid from your house. So don't think about design when you're laying it out, just lay out a grid, okay? And I also have 45-degree angles in here, and it comes from the same points. Every time there's a window edge, a window middle, window edge, you make a grid, okay? And then you start laying out potential. You're not using every line. You're just playing with it. Like you put tracing paper over the grid. Tracing paper should be your friend if you like to design. And then you just start laying out areas. So let's go to this one really quick. So here's an example of that one on the last slide. And I'm just playing around with the lines. Like, what could I do for my patio? What could I do for my lawn? And this is actually perfect for geometric designs. You can do curvilinear also. Curvilinear tends to be you curling, like maybe just rounding off a corner or using half a circle, those types of things to make it more curvilinear if you want. So Sandra asked, what do the different colors signify? Perfect. That's a great question. So you don't have to use different colors, but on my plan, I use red to signify a focal point through a window, a viewpoint. So on my drawing, everything that's red is a viewpoint from the center of a window or a door. And I just do that for myself so I know which ones should be a focal point if I want to use a focal point. And everything else on here that's just blue. Or I guess blue is 90 degrees and then the black is 45 degrees, sorry. So you can just, if you're using grid paper is awesome. You can just the grid paper can help you do a 45 by just cutting through the diagonal of the squares if you want to. That's an awesome question. Thank you. So these two drawings right here, which I just realized I should have pulled them together closer. These are same house, same grid, but I'm exploring one on an angle of 45 and I'm exploring one on a 90-degree angle. So here's a deck or a patio, here's a shed, here's a lawn space, and here's some bed. And I'm not figuring, again, am I even talking about plants yet? We'll talk about plants soon, but we're still figuring out like, what should the rooms be and where should the beds be? And this process helps you with that, which is really cool. You want to keep it simple. So once you figure out like, this is my lawn, that's my patio, that's my shed, then you can go over here and fill in the details. Like maybe I want this to be limestone or pavers or whatever it might be. And then you can play with that. Okay. And I wish I can talk to you about this all night. We have like 6 more tips to go through. So I'm just going to zip through this and introduce the idea, but know that on the resource page, I have some additional links for you. So then you can get a little bit more information on it. So these are some of my students. I'm going to show you some of their work really quick on Lines of Force. We have a design membership, and this is one of the things that we've done a couple times now. And this is the recent one that we just did just last month, I think it was. And I had them design a patio, and they had to pick a shape, like a square, a circle, or a triangle, or they could do all if they wanted to. So this is the house they all had, and they drew lines of force, just a grid. So this is Jeannie. She just drew a grid off of her house. We're not designing anything yet. And then here is one of her design ideas. And she decided to use rectangles, which is great. So that's her design. She's using her 45-degree lines. And then here's another one. So this is Chris, and I'm including their Instagram pages if you want to visit them. So she did a 45, same house, same grid, but look how much differently she approached this. She now knows where the beds are. She knows where her patio is with her chairs and her furniture, her dining area, and she knows where the lawn space is. And here's another one of Chris's. She did it on a 90-degree instead of a 45. But look how she did rotate the paving to a 45, which I thought was really cool. So you can still see that idea, but now she's rotating it. So this is the magic of lines of force. And when you understand this tool, this is going to save you a lot of time. It's going to help you define where planting beds go. So when you do buy plants, hopefully you know why you're choosing them. Because like maybe you want this planting bed right here to be a hedge. So there's a wall there. So maybe it's going to be taller shrubs. Or maybe you want this planting bed to be more wild plantings and you want it to be lower. So once you know what the shape of the room is and what the beds look like, it's easier to go to a nursery or a local garden center and buy those plants because you can visualize the space now. So it just saves you a lot of time and hopefully a lot of frustration. And then here's another one. This is Kathy. She did more of a deck design, and she pretended that she's in Seattle. So she pretended that there was a big grade change on hers. But again, same house, same grid. But she's trying it on a 45-degree angle. She's got a fountain feature. She's got a deck, all kinds of cool things. This is Kathy's also. Same grid, same house. But now she has a simple rectangle patio. Really cool stepping stones. I absolutely love this. Like, wouldn't it be fun to put ground covers in between these? How fun is that? And now she's defined that room, right? Like, so remember, these are all garden rooms, right? We're designing the rooms. Nobody knows what these plants are yet. We're designing the rooms so we can start to visualize that garden room, and then we can start visualizing where the plants might go on the next step. So here's another one with the circles. I said you could use circles in the design also. Same grid. Now she's using the grid to help define like maybe where the center of the circle should go and how big it should be. So there's a lot of fun things here. Yeah, Marge, there's more rectilinear. For my students for this assignment, the question was, I don't see any curved beds. So I said to them for this assignment, they need to use a rectangle, a circle, or a triangle, because I got that from a book called Foundations of Landscape Architecture. Foundations of Landscape Architecture. It's an awesome book. We were using some of the concepts from that book and just using a shape for the bottom. So that's why most of these are like a square or a rectangle or something like that. But Kathy did use a shape here, more of a curve, which is cool. And you can do curves with lines of force. It's not the easiest. I would suggest when you're using lines of force to start to do rectilinear designs just to kind of practice, and then use those as a starting point to start playing with curves. When you use curves in general, I want you to still remember you're creating outdoor rooms. And we'll talk about this when we talk about bed lines next. Curvilinear or rectilinear, you're still creating a room. And I will show you some examples in just a little bit more, just some curvilinear designs. But I'm glad you asked that. Here's another one, same house, same grid. And you can see she's got a deck. We've got some stepping stones. And actually, I didn't show the elevation, which is when you're standing in front looking at it. She drew this beautiful elevation of what it looks like at this end. This focal point actually ends at a really cool fireplace. And she's got this fence and it's really beautiful. But hopefully that gives you an idea of what lines of force is. And that's just a very quick overview of them, of lines of force, but I'm hoping it'll help you lay out your own garden. The biggest thing that lines of force does, besides define your garden room, it actually unifies your garden room that you're creating, your entire landscape, to the architecture of your house. So they fit together. It isn't just these two disjointed things. They actually work together as a system, which is really cool. And I got to keep an eye on the clock, because we're only on the third one, but we can do this. So those are the two first ones, like major. And as long as you understand those concepts, I feel like you've got a good framework to save a lot of money, to save a lot of time, to make smarter choices in the beginning of that design process. So let's talk about something more, more detailed, more like, right in front of us, bed lines. Okay. So we're creating with lines of force in garden rooms, edges, right? We're creating edges of beds, edges of rooms. But what do those bed lines or those edges actually look like? And I'd like to mention this because I think it's a good thing in terms of maintenance. And it's a good thing in terms of just helping us have cleaner lines so we can have stronger outdoor spaces. So here's some curves for you now. What I like to show with this image is that when we are creating our planting beds, which are the edges of our rooms, like this on the right, this is a room that I'm creating. This lawn, the light green is a lawn space, and the dark green would be the planting areas. I'm still creating a room. So when you are laying out your beds, whether they are curvilinear or rectilinear, if you're using lines of force, it's important to still think about when you're doing bed lines, are you using those beds to capture or hug your garden room, your space that you're living in? So always think about that. So the ones on the left are very disjointed. Like they're still kind of creating a room, right? They're still kind of creating a room in the top here, but they're really disjointed. But how can you have these long sweeping curves that are actually hugging the room that you're creating, and they'll be easier to maintain? Long sweeping curves are easier to maintain than something like this. This is what we often do. So this is the planting bed on the bottom right. We often create bed lines that outline the plants rather than outlining the space. So we're talking about rooms a lot. We're talking about lines of force. We're talking about these decisions of how to capture space rather than creating bed lines. And you're thinking, I don't want you to think we're designing the beds. I want you to think we're designing the space. We're designing the garden room. When you understand that, again, things get so much easier in that whole design process. So we're not going to do these wiggly lines. How would you like to mow that or maintain that, right? That's hard to maintain too. So it's not only a smart design choice in terms of making a really great lawn space or a great room. So remember, this is the room up here on the top left, right? The plants are the wall of that room. And this bed line is way easier to maintain than that bed line, okay? So smart design elements aren't just about good design. They're also about lower maintenance, right? We want to make these smart choices so we can have these beautiful rooms that we can use, but they're not making us constantly be having to clean up lines and use our string trimmers all the time. And like, how can we do that in a way that we're not constantly out there trying to make these wiggly lines all perfectly wiggly all the time? So here's just some examples of curvy lines now. And how can we create these stronger sweeping curves that are creating a space in front of us versus necessarily the beds? So in this area, in the front, this is where it's hugging this lawn space in the front. That's the room. Now there's also a room behind this arbor and fence. There's another room back there, right? And there'll be another room in the backyard. This is a drawing that we did in our graphics class, our graphics membership when we learned 2-point perspective. We were just practicing it. And it's just fun to try to see what you can use to do with curves. This is another one. I don't know if a lot of you follow Tracy on Plaids and Poppies on Instagram. I got to visit her garden last year in Michigan, and look at these beautiful curves. Beautiful. Like, that is so nice to maintain. She's thinking about the spaces she's creating here, not just the beds. The beds are there as the wall to this open space. And it's just a really nice, clean lines to work with. I want to make sure. Peggy just asked, Peg, I just saw your question. What is the best way to finish a rock border? That is a really detailed question. I would say if you're going to do a rock border, make sure you can maintain the edge of it. If you have lawn going up to it, you know how hard that is to maintain that. So maybe the rock border is, maybe you have a straight edge in front that you can mow, or maybe it bumps up to another hardscape element like a patio or something, there's plants behind it. So I love a rock border, but you'll have to figure out a way to have a clean edge on one side. I've seen people do it with mulch. You can line the front maybe with limestone or some other kind of hardscape, just so you can have that clean edge. And I'll show you some examples of other, not rock borders, but other clean edges that you can do. So again, here's some more lawn spaces, just a little bit more clean. And then this is actually a drawing I did for lines of forest, but I want to show you one of my other membership is actually doing curvilinear lines with lines of force this month. And we did this patio, but then even the lawn spaces, I'm trying to keep them as clean as possible so we can maintain those spaces. And then here's a more curvilinear one. But again, large sweeping curves. And these stepping stones would be flush with the ground in the middle. So you can just go right over them with a mower if you need to. So how do we maintain those edges? Let's just talk about that really quick. One way is to mow it. And if someone you just have a naturalized area, maybe you have a large acreage and you just have a naturalized area, just mow where you need to walk or where you need to sit. Okay, that's the simple way, right? Now, we don't all want that in our front yard, right? So some things to consider is a lot of us we use a hand spade. And so if you see this image down here, it's just between the lawn and the bed, we hand spade it, and we actually do that every year. It looks something like this. I don't know if you can see the edge of this. And we just have this nice clean edge along the lawn space. This picture right here was in Buffalo, New York at the garden walk there this last summer. And then here's another one, not a perfect circle. It's not perfect circle, but it's still a nice clean edge. I use a spade to do that. And then here's another one also. I don't know how many of you just spade your edges. I did that for years, and that's okay to do, but that's going to take you some time, right? That takes time. So I've always thought about, like, in my own yard over the years, I've added things like brick to the edge. So then it's easier to maintain. Then I don't have to hand spade it every year. So here's the detail at the bottom. We have a brick, we have our bed back here, we have a brick edge, and then we have a lawn. That's another way that you can hold a bed together. Now, I understand brick costs money, so you're not necessarily saving money with this one, but you are saving time long-term. Like, for those of you that have a brick or a limestone edge, isn't it heaven when you can just put the lawnmower wheel on that edge and mow without worrying about having to, like, spade it all the time, right? Like, that just takes time to do that. So this is one of my favorite things over the years that we've done. Now, I don't have lawn anymore, and we'll talk about lawn in a second. But for those of you that do have lawn, I'm always thinking about how can we make it easier to maintain it? Because sometimes lawn is appropriate, right? Sometimes our kids want to play football, or we need an area for our dogs, or whatever it might be. And sometimes these edges are the hardest thing to maintain when you have that. So here's some other examples. When they are flush with the ground, it's a lot easier. And that's why when Peggy had asked about the rocks, rock borders are awesome. But then to think about, how do you have a clean edge in front of those rocks so you can still mow them? And everybody's giving each other advice. And thank you, Susan, for doing that, to answer that question about the border, which is really awesome. How do you keep the grass from growing in between the bricks? That is a great question. How do I do that? I don't know if I've had issues with that. I think I try to keep it under control early in the spring. And then as the summer progresses, I usually use a green mulch in my beds, and that helps too. So we will talk about that in a second. That's a great question. I don't know if other people, let's see, Sherry said, my issue with brick is my husband drives the mower over it and causes the brick to sink or flip up. Just a thought, since it has happened to me. Yes, so if your brick is moving, you might want to have it be on a more stable base. Maybe, as this is more work though, maybe a little bit of a gravel base behind it that you compact. Now, I will tell you, when we put our bricks in our last house, it took weeks and months to do that, because I would just do it a little bit at a time, because it takes time to put that effort in there. So you just have to figure out what works best for you. And it may not be pavers. I have other suggestions too. So here's another, I don't know if you see this detail on the left. This is probably not the best solution if you're trying to save time, because you can't mow this, right? You can't get close to this. You have to use a string trimmer to do this. If they're flush, it's a little bit easier. Okay. So we want to be careful about having things above the ground, because now it's an obstacle versus now some of you may not matter. It may not even, you may not even care about that. And that's perfectly fine. But if you're someone looking to save time, you want to have it flush. That's awesome. Pam just said, I use paving base under the bricks. It helps, but they still sink over the years. And just with anything, you're still going to have that issue over the years. So let's talk about this long-term solution instead. If you don't have lawn, or if you don't necessarily have space for lawn, or like in my case, lawn's not going to grow in my yard because we have an oak community in my backyard and I can't get grass to grow anyway. So another option is just not to have lawn, and you have a hardscape element next to your planting bed. So in this case, you have a planting bed next to a hardscape area, paver area. So here's just some examples of that. We just have a patio right up next to it. Like, how beautiful is this? You have a patio and then you have the planting beds. And I always like to tell people, ask yourself, think about whether, if you have a small garden in particular, just ask yourself, do you need the lawn? If you do, that's great. Like if you have a small dog or whatever it might be, I totally get it. But if you don't need it, then that's another option, is that maybe you just skip that part of it. And then you just have a hardscape next to your planting bed, and then you don't have to worry about that edge as much. But if anybody else has had successful edges for beds, let us know in the chat so we can share it with each other. So over time, all of these things will fail, right? Because with anything that we design, things could, like even a patio area, eventually over 10 or 20 years, things might fail a little bit. But if you have a good sub base, that's where things usually last longer, which is really nice. Okay, so here's some more examples. We have a gravel patio, all kinds of cool things. So let's talk about plant forms now. So this is something that's more of an aesthetic thing, but it'll help you when you're purchasing plants, okay? Have you all heard, I'm sure you have, because in your Master Gardener training, you probably have talked about form, texture, and color in planting design. We're not going to go over all three of those today. They're all important. We want to consider plant forms, plant texture, which is the size of the leaf and more, and then colors. But one thing I want to focus on today are plant forms. Plant forms are awesome. And I'm just going to go through this part briefly, but it's one of those things, again, you're not going to necessarily save money going to the store because of a plant form. You're going to save money and time because as you choose plants, you're going to think through some things about what plants look like, not in plan view from the sky down, but what it looks like as you're standing in front of something. So we talked about form, texture, and color already. I mentioned that. Form is the primary design consideration you want to think about besides the ecological aspect or the environmental aspect of plants. Of course, we want to make sure they can grow in shade, they grow in your zone, all of those other things. I'm talking about just the aesthetics right now. So this is a primary design consideration. You want to make sure you're considering plant forms when you are actually organizing your composition of plants, okay? So here's some examples of what I mean. So some plants have an upright form, some are columnar, some are round, some are vase-shaped. Does everybody know this already, hopefully? And if you don't, and if this is your first time learning it, this is another awesome thing for you to know. So when you are choosing plants, you are actually creating a composition of plant forms. You are also considering texture and color, okay? So I don't want to downplay those, but form is consistent year round. Your garden is going to look awesome year round if you put a lot of emphasis on the form of the plant. You are an artist, right? You're going to create these awesome forms. And when you know this, when you buy plants and you're designing your plants for your yard, if you know that you want a focal point somewhere, like maybe you need to have an upright tree, right? Or whatever it might be, you want to consider different plant forms to make it interesting. So you want to have a variety of plant forms and you want to have repetition. This is at Proven Winners in Michigan. But look at these strong forms, like round, and you want to consider the natural form. I'm not against trimming things. I got a trimmed hedge myself, but understand the natural form of a plant because you can take advantage of that and create some really cool things. So this is the elevation on the top when you're looking at it from the front looking on, and this is a plan view. And you want to make sure you consider both. But when we only look at a plan view, we're not understanding what plants look like. And this is what we look at every day, right? So when we're arranging plant forms in front of our house or in front of a structure, we should be considering, how do we get people to the front door of our house? Like, how do we use plant forms in a way that emphasizes the front door? How do we make it look beautiful for our neighbors? Whatever that means to you. How do we frame the structure or the building that we have on the site? And these are some of my students' designs. We have a drawing class, and they did this for their elevation drawing example, and they learned about plant forms and how to draw the plant forms. But do you see how they're using plant forms? We don't know what these plants are yet. That's part of the design process. You're figuring that out first. But once you figure this out, like, think of the time you're going to save when you go to the nursery, bring this image with you and be like, this is what I'm imagining. And then talk to the person at the nursery and say, can you help me? I need some low growy things here. I need some round shrubs here. And I need some pointy shrubs to kind of look like this. Like, this is your landscape plan of sorts. This is your start of that. You're starting to think about plants, but now you can go to the nursery with these drawings, and you can have somebody at the nursery or the garden center help you choose these. So understanding plant form and starting to draw, and the same thing, take a photo, like we talk about photos a lot. Take a photo of your house, put some tracing paper over it, and start drawing some circles and some columnar things. And I gave you resources on that resource page, so you have that little diagram with all the different plant forms. You can use those to start creating this beautiful composition of plant forms, and then you can help, do some research and then visit your local nursery to help figure that out, like what plants would fit these. So I love this because it just helps a lot when you're making plant choices, and just helps narrow down your choices, and it just helps you save that time, like not getting overwhelmed with what plant should I use. Narrow it down by plant forms first, if you can. And then of course you need to consider form or color and texture also, but that's a whole nother presentation that we don't have time for today, but I'm hoping this gets you started. Okay. Number 5, I know we only have like 15 minutes, 10 minutes left, so we're gonna zip through these, but these last few are a little bit easier to hopefully understand. So plants inspired from the site. When you are choosing plants, you are now considering, right, plant forms. You already know your plant beds because you laid out your garden rooms, right? The next thing I want to encourage you to do is to think about how you can create your plant palette by being inspired by the site that you live in. So I don't know if any of you have read Planting in a Post-Wild World by Claudia West and Thomas Rayner. It's right down here at the bottom of the slide. And I think I have it on the resource page also that I shared with you. They talk about designed plant communities. And the whole idea is, how can we be inspired by the sites that we live in and native plant communities, and use it as a foundation to create our plantings. Now, they're not saying they have to be necessarily all native, even though I love native plants. I would say my yard is probably 70% to 80% native, and I'm trying to get it higher than that. And then you can use other plants to fit into that community. The idea is they should all be happy together on this site. And it's not the easiest thing in the world. There's a lot of, oh, thank you so much, Alicia. She just shared a link to the book. But it's a wonderful idea, and it's a great way to narrow down our plants, because it's hard to narrow down plants. I mean, we're narrowing it down by plant forms, right, first, or however you want to do it. And then if you can start thinking about what plants would grow naturally on my site, what would be a natural plant palette? So a lot of us are from Iowa. And so a lot of our communities might be, dry upland prairie or oak savanna or maple linden woodland. This house right here is Kelly Norris's in Des Moines. And I love going to his house because I love seeing what plants he chooses. And he also uses a main plant community to get started, and then he throws in some other plants too. You want to be careful. You don't want to use invasive plants if you don't use natives, but use mostly natives to start. And if you live in a site, let's use my house as an example, actually. So here's my house. You've already seen the house on the right, or my backyard on the right. The left side is my front of it. We have an oak coverage. We live in Des Moines, and in our neighborhood, it's mostly oak trees, very mature ones. So I've had to do research, and I kind of see ours being either an oak savanna, but I think it's more of an oak hickory upland woodland. And I had to do, and I'm still doing research on this. Like, what are the normal things that might be in there? Sedges, meadow roosts, tons. And I will tell you, sedges and Solomon seal are already in my yard. So they're already there, which is crazy. I keep digging them up, and not digging them up on purpose. Like when we're doing the patio, we're like, oh my gosh, what's this? So I keep moving them around in there. Other plants like wild geranium, columbine, viburnums, dogwoods, like I'm finding out that these are the plants that thrive in this type of a community in my yard. So my front yard is a right of way and it's all clay and it's horrible up there, but I've had to find native plants that can handle clay in my right of way. So it takes time. So you're not saving time necessarily in the beginning, but you're going to save time long term, and it's better for the environment too if you can. So some things you could search for. You can search for on Google native plant communities. You can type in Iowa native plant communities. That's how I find most of my research. Another fun resource is this Izell Plants, and maybe Alicia can share that one too. That's a kind of a collective of different nurseries that share native plants. But what's cool about it is you can type in, I have a very shady site. I live in Des Moines, Iowa, and it's really dry. And then it tells you some foundational native plants that would grow there. It's really cool. And there's a lot of, thank you, Alicia. There's a lot of other cool ones that you can go to too, but I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that one. So those are the idea of being inspired by your site. I don't know how many of you already do that, but I think it's a fun process. I've struggled with I mean, I will tell you, I have boxwoods in my backyard, which are obviously not native. So that's the one plant that I have that's definitely not native. Those are my structure plants to create the walls that I need. But now I'm working in lots of carex and a lot of these other awesome plants. And it's been a fun process. I'm still learning. It's not perfect, but I'm still learning, which is cool. This is the other concept that I want to share with you. I'm looking at the clock to make sure we're doing good. Plant layers. So if you think lines of force is impactful and the idea of garden rooms, I would say plant layers is your next thing that's going to change your world. If you haven't read Planting in a Post-Wild World, the book that we just shared earlier, or you can read New Naturalism, which is Kelly Norris's book, also talks about this. This is an ecological foundation that's going to impact your long-term management of your garden. Okay. So the idea is, and I don't know how many of you know about this already, but this is amazing. So when you are planting any garden, even if it's native, that's awesome. This is inspired by native plant communities, but it doesn't have to be a native plant community garden, type of garden to use this concept. You're going to have 3 layers vertically when you're designing. And the 3 are structural, which I'll mention here, and I'll explain these in a second. Seasonal theme or vignette. Kelly Norris uses the term vignette, and Planting in a Post-Wild World uses the word seasonal theme, but they're the same idea. And then the bottom layer, you can call a ground cover, a matrix, or a green mulch, whatever you want to call it, but it's the same idea. And let me show you, we're talking about the resources. All my resources are on that landing page, just so you know. So make sure you look at that later. So this is a visual of what these 3 layers are that you should consider. The structural layer are your woody plants or any plant that does not move around. It's there year round, like my hedge, like at my front yard, I have a hedge of boxwood. That is my structural layer. And then I have all these other more wild ecological plantings in front of it, okay? The seasonal theme layer or the vignette layer is the flowering, the plants that take turns flowering all season. It's kind of like the dynamic choreography. Kelly Norris calls it the party that you bring to the garden. It's basically all your fun blooming plants, right? Alliums, liatris, whatever, all your plants you're going to like, you love to have flowering, okay? But this is the key one, the ground cover or matrix layer. That layer is the functional part of this whole system. You need to have some lower system of plants to hold the weeds down or the plants that you don't want. So when you were talking about lawn earlier, in terms of getting it into the cracks of the brick and all of that, if we're not mowing and we're establishing maybe this ground cover or green mulch layer instead, they should be underneath all these other plants. And it's just this system that's always there. So here's all 3 together. Carex, or Carex, is a great ground cover mulch. If you're in the sun, prairie dropsy, there's all kinds of awesome plants that you can use for that layer, but it needs to be a lower plant, something that's going to be there most of the year and strong enough to keep the plants we don't want out or in. But we want to keep the plants that we want, but we want to get rid of the plants that we don't want. And if you study your plant communities, you could probably see what's natural. Like for us, it would be carex, because carex is a natural, and geraniums, wild geranium is a great matrix plant too. So those would be wild plant community type matrix plants. It takes time to do these. I would suggest that you look at those 2 books that I shared, because both Kelly and Thomas Rainer and Claudia West, they share these plant layers in their books. and they give great resources for these. So I would definitely look at that. But this is an amazing one. I would definitely encourage you to consider doing plant layers. This is from Planting in a Post-Wild World, so you can see an image of it. These top two are the design layers. They consider it design because the structure layers, when we start to create the walls for our garden rooms, right? The seasonal theme is that party, that fun, that dynamic energy, and the functional layer is keeping the weeds down. That's the floor. Okay. Now, when you first install something like this, it takes some money to do, especially the ground cover layer. But long term, I'm sure a lot of you already do this green mulch layer. You're probably doing it with Vinca or something else. You know, you're always trying to keep the weeds or the plants as thick as possible so the weeds don't come up. You want to fill your plants or your beds with plants. That's the whole point of this, but 3 layers is even better, which is really cool. So you want the legibility of the designs at the top, the fun stuff, but the bottom part, the ground cover, is where that workhorse is, or keeping the weeds down. And here's another great image from Fine Gardening magazine. It shows the same idea. It takes time. Do we need all 3 layers? No. You may decide that you only want the matrix and the vignette layer, or the seasonal theme layer. That's perfectly fine. Or you may just want the matrix layer and the structure layer. You don't have to have all 3 of them. You can just use whatever makes sense to you. This is a beautiful matrix, a design plant community by Kelly Norris. This is at the Blank Performing Arts Center in Indianola. Hopefully I got that right. And this is more images of that, but he's using all these layers. You can't always see it, but look how full this is. It's amazing. The goal is to fill the bed so they're keeping out the plants you don't want. Aren't these beautiful? This is in Iowa City. Absolutely beautiful. And then the last couple of things I want to mention to you, I know we're right at 7, so I'm just going to zip through these last 2 really quick. So plant layer is important, absolutely important. So definitely consider reading those 2 books if you're interested in that topic. Water. Of course, our main goal should always be, how can we conserve water on our site through careful plant selection, and how do we keep water on our site? We always want to keep water on our site versus pushing it off. So that is a smart thing to think about. And how do you do that? So some things to consider. How can we use drought tolerant plants? Now, a lot of native plants, if you're using a native plant community, that's at least the basis of your plants, you know, right plant, right place type of thing, this is going to be an easy one for you. How do we collect water on site? I don't know how many of you collect water on site in a rain barrel and whatever it might be. Sometimes it's just this shallow ditch in an area, so it kind of collects a little bit before it goes down, whatever that might be. More efficient irrigation. Do you have drip irrigation? Or maybe just hand watering a certain plant to get it established right at the root versus just spraying the water in the air. Practical turf areas. If we're going to have turf, let's make sure we have a reason for it. This image on the left is so funny. Like, do we really need turf there? Could that be something else? Like, if it's a narrow bed, maybe if, like this one on the left, they just decided to put plants there. It's narrow, right? Like, we don't need to put lawn there. So consider when you need lawn and when you don't. I'm not against lawn. I think it just needs to have a reason for when you have it. And there's a lot of great reasons for why you'd want it. Other great green mulch. We just talked about this for keeping moisture in the ground, keeping water, keeping your plants healthier. You want that green mulch. This is Kelly's house again, Norris in Des Moines. Absolutely beautiful. And then again, that ground cover layer is this bottom one, this mulch, this green mulch, they call it. Consider permeable paving. It's not perfect, and not all paving is gonna be perfectly permeable unless you're gonna use permeable pavers, which is a whole nother topic. If you can use gravel or stepping stones with some open spaces, it's not perfect because we compact it and it's not perfect. But anytime we have plants in particular, that's going to help a lot to keep water on the site. And anything permeable like this is at least going to slow down the water flow, which is nice. Rain gardens. I don't know how many of you have rain gardens, but rain gardens are awesome. It's basically a water place where you can collect water on your site. It holds it for less than 12 hours, 12 to 24 hours, and then the water should go into the ground. So that's a whole nother talk in itself, but it's a great way to capture water and then keep it on the site. And then the last topic is just fun stuff. Like, how can we recycle and reuse objects in our garden, whether it's paving? I love this. Like, how can you recycle paving? These are in Memphis, Tennessee. If you haven't been to the garden walk down there, it's awesome and super fun. But I love all the cool things that they do. This is at Roy Diblick's farm at Northwind Perennial Farm in Burlington, Wisconsin. Again, I mean, how many of you have used these old bricks and then you can see stamped like this, the place where they came from, which is just awesome. And then you just reuse them in some way. Like, there's a story then, which is so much fun. And there's a boulder wall, which I absolutely love. Broken concrete. You would think that broken concrete would not be the prettiest, but you can do some cool things. This is Nan Sturman. Her expertise is water-wise gardening in California. She's got some great books, Nan Sturman. And I have links to her books too, actually, on my resource page. Broken concrete. So this is California, but here it is in Iowa. So this is at Kelly Norris's and David McKinney's house, their garden, broken concrete. Look how beautiful this is. You can reuse materials in very beautiful ways if you want to, but isn't that the coolest thing? And then these are logs, recycled logs that are now stairs on Martha's Vineyard. One log, and they chopped it so there's stairs in it, and then they put it on the hillside. Isn't that the coolest thing ever? And then all kinds of recycled materials, gutters for planters. You can use shutters for different details. I love these chairs. They're just wood chairs, but look at, they knitted on there to do some interesting things and add interest on there without, getting more expensive furniture. Displaying our collections can be fun things. And how can you recycle old furniture to be in the garden? Old chairs. I mean, this garden was in Memphis, and look at how fun that is. It's super fun. These are old doors they're recycling to make a bar area and a bench, which is fun. This was in Memphis. Memphis is the best place for garden tours. I have to tell you that. This is just a fun shelf on a wall, right? And we're displaying plants. And then this is at Roy Diblick's farm, architectural artifacts everywhere. Not recycling, but displaying your collection of watering cans. There's all kinds of cool things. There's so many amazing things. And that's it. I actually got to the end, believe it or not. But there's a lot of cool things that we can do. Now, I know we're over now. And if you want to put in the chat while we're finishing up things that you've done in your garden, please let us know. But what I want you to take away from this is that if you can make smart design decisions in the beginning, creating your room, using lines of force to define the edges and the beds. So when you buy plants, you know where you're putting them and you're saving some time. You can lay out your plants and your beds, by doing, quick tracing paper method. They don't have to be to scale. Just use string and stakes in your yard. All thinking about plants with plant form, thinking about ecology, thinking about plant layers, which is like the most impactful thing you could ever do long-term for maintenance and management, which is so cool. But any other questions, let me know.